He didn't want much, just shelter from the cold. But when the little German shepherd pup cried out for help, what came wasn't kindness, it was a trap, poisoned, left to die in the snow. No one heard him cry, except one man, broken by grief, hiding from the world. And one dog, Solace, old and loyal, who never stopped believing in second chances. What they found that night wasn't just a wounded puppy. It was a secret buried deep in the forest. And a message, left by a woman long gone. The storm had passed, but its presence still lingered. Frost clung to the windows of the modest two-story brick house, and a white hush had settled over the outskirts of Rivershade. Caleb Thorne stepped outside, his breath visible in the brittle air, boots crunching through a layer of fresh snow that reached past his ankles. He wore an olive-green military parka, frayed at the cuffs, and a knitted cap pulled low over his graying temples. His posture was upright, but there was a weariness in the way his shoulders curled slightly inward, as if carrying an invisible burden. Beside him walked Solace, a mature golden retriever with a thick coat the color of honey in twilight. 8 years old, Solace moved with the grace of a creature accustomed to purpose. His gait was calm, measured, but his eyes never stopped scanning, ears twitching at the faintest crack of ice or distant rustle. Once a therapy dog in war zones, Solace had helped Caleb treat wounded soldiers, children, even dying animals. That was before Eleanor's death. Since then, Caleb had withdrawn, not only from people, but from himself, and Solace had become his anchor to whatever humanity remained in him. Caleb trudged alongside the dog in silence, following a familiar trail at the edge of the forest. A dull ache pulsed in his chest, not from the cold, but from memory. Eleanor, his wife, had loved walking this trail. She was a lean woman with the build of a runner, tall, lithe, always in motion. Her hair had been the color of wet maple bark, usually pulled into a ponytail beneath a wool cap. She had a sharp mind, investigative by nature, which had led her to environmental fieldwork and, ultimately, the questions that may have cost her life. Her death had been ruled an accident, car crash during a storm, but Caleb never believed that. There were things she had told him in whispers before she left that last time, things he couldn't unhear. Solace suddenly stopped. The dog's body went rigid, head turning sharply to the left, ears upright. "What is it?" Caleb muttered, instinctively lowering his voice. Solace let out a low whine and darted off the path, bounding through the powdery snow with surprising urgency for his age. Caleb swore under his breath and followed, lungs burning as he pushed past low branches crusted in ice. They entered a narrow hollow where the snow dipped unnaturally. The stillness here felt different, thicker. Then he heard it, a high-pitched whimper, faint, broken. Caleb's breath caught. Solace was already circling a shallow depression near a cluster of fir trees. Caleb approached, and his stomach twisted. In the middle of the pit, roughly 6 feet across and at least 4 feet deep, lay a small figure curled in on itself. Trembling, panting, half buried in snow. A German shepherd pup, maybe 4 months old, black and tan fur matted with frost. One paw twisted unnaturally. A smear of red laced the ice at its side. White foam gathered at the corners of its mouth. "Damn it," Caleb murmured, dropping to his knees at the edge. His training kicked in. Visual scan, pupil response, breath rate. The pup's eyes were glassy, barely focusing. Poison? Nerve agent? Or maybe a sedative. There was a trap buried nearby. He could see the rough lines of its collapse beneath the disturbed snow. A hunting snare, illegally placed, likely baited. For a long moment, he hesitated. He'd promised himself not to get involved anymore. Not after Eleanor. Not after what happened to Maya. But Solace was staring at him, calm, insistent, unwavering. Caleb met the dog's gaze and saw not just loyalty, but expectation. As if saying, "This is why you're still here." He moved. Caleb pulled a climbing rope from his pack, wrapped it around a nearby tree, and lowered himself slowly into the pit. The air was colder here, stale with the scent of blood and rusted metal. The pup growled weakly as he approached, but it was the growl of fear, not aggression. "It's all right," Caleb said gently, crouching beside it. "I've got you." He slid his jacket off and wrapped the shivering body inside, carefully supporting the injured leg. The pup trembled, eyelids fluttering. Caleb climbed back out, heart racing not from exertion, but from a sense he hadn't felt in years, a sense that something important had just begun. Back home, Caleb laid the pup on a padded mat near the fireplace. Solace hovered close, sniffing the newcomer's fur, then sat nearby like a sentinel. Caleb worked quickly, setting up an IV drip, checking vitals, applying a topical anesthetic. The swelling on the paw was severe but manageable. What concerned him more was the pupil dilation and muscle spasms. He retrieved his old military scanner from a drawer, an outdated but still functional device that read microchips in animals. He passed it slowly over the pup's shoulder blades. The device beeped. A reading appeared. CG09X. Caleb froze. His mouth went dry. CG09X. He hadn't heard that designation in years, not since Eleanor's last field notes, where she mentioned a rumored military-civilian crossover project involving canines trained to detect rare geological materials. She had said it half in jest, calling it Project Ghost Nose, but there had been something in her eyes that night. Worry, excitement, fear. He stared at the pup now, breathing shallow, barely conscious, and felt something twist deep in his gut. The past wasn't done with him yet. The fire crackled quietly, sending orange light flickering across the walls of Caleb's modest living room. Outside, snow still blanketed the yard in clean silence, untouched except for the winding trail of footsteps he and Solace had left earlier. The house was sparsely decorated, utilitarian to the point of austerity. A few framed photographs lined a shelf above the fireplace, one of Eleanor standing beside a young, proud Caleb in military fatigues. Another of Solace, tongue lolling, taken at the training base in Texas years ago. The third photo showed all three together, arms and paws entwined after a successful search and rescue operation on Mount Ashbury. That photo was slightly crooked, as though someone, or something, had nudged it recently. Rune lay curled in a fleece-lined dog bed near the hearth, still weak but breathing steadily. His body had stopped trembling, though his eyes remained unfocused, occasionally flinching at shadows or sudden shifts of light. The young German shepherd was a lean creature, all limbs and oversized paws, with classic black and tan markings and a distinct diamond-shaped patch of white fur on his chest. A thin scar ran along his flank, old, half-healed, and jagged. Caleb had cleaned the wound earlier, noting the odd angle of the tissue, as though it had been inflicted deliberately. Solace lay beside him, chin resting near Rune's paw. The older dog's behavior was unmistakably maternal, licking the pup's ears, nudging him upright when he whimpered, pressing his body close to provide warmth. Caleb watched the interaction from his armchair, elbows on knees, chin resting on steepled fingers. There was an ache behind his ribs, one he couldn't quite place. The scanner beeped softly from the table, the designation CG09X still glowing faintly on its screen. Caleb stared at it for a long moment, then stood and retrieved a battered metal lockbox from a drawer near the kitchen. Inside were relics he hadn't touched in years. His VA discharge papers, Eleanor's field notes, and a green leather-bound notebook worn thin at the spine. Her handwriting filled the pages. Slanted, compact, efficient. She had been meticulous, a scientist's mind paired with a soldier's discipline. In the early days of her environmental work, she'd investigated poaching routes across the Canadian border, uncovering signs of black market animal trafficking masked under forestry grants. That line of inquiry had led her to strange places: military contractors with vague mandates, animal training camps with restricted access, hushed references to canine capability extensions. Caleb flipped to a section near the end, where the ink was darker, the handwriting hastier. She'd written about Project Geoscan, a rumored DARPA-backed program that used canines to detect subsurface mineral deposits. Eleanor had been skeptical at first, but something had changed in her tone across the entries. Excitement, then concern, then fear. The last few pages had been torn out. Caleb frowned. He remembered her voice one night, unusually soft, as she leaned against the doorway, coat half buttoned, snow melting from her shoulders. "If anything happens," she'd said, "look for the white mark. They'll try to bury it." He had assumed she meant documents or some government trail, but now he wondered if she had meant a scar, or a symbol, or a dog. A sudden sound snapped him from his thoughts, a dull clatter behind the armchair. Rune had jolted awake, Ears flattened, pupils blown wide. Caleb turned, spotting a battery that had rolled from under the old radio cabinet. Solace hadn't moved, but Rune had already risen to his feet, wobbly but alert, and was pawing at the floor with frantic urgency. He sniffed once, twice, then dug a paw under the cabinet and dislodged the rest of the battery pack, growling low in his throat. "That's odd," Caleb murmured. He retrieved the batteries and glanced toward the pup, who was now pacing in a tight circle, tail low, body tense. The old landline phone on the wall chimed faintly, a single ping as it powered up from a recent storm outage. Rune froze, eyes fixed on the device. The phone hadn't even rung, but the pup had sensed it coming. Caleb narrowed his eyes. "You're not just smart," he muttered. "You're trained, hardwired for it." Rune suddenly backed away from the table as the digital clock blinked red, a harmless LED light. But the dog snarled, snapping his jaws once at the illumination, before retreating behind Solace. His body language shifted into full stress response, tail tucked, ears pinned, hackles rising. Solace licked his ear once and lay beside him protectively. Caleb felt a chill not from the cold. This dog wasn't a rescue, he was a survivor, a trained one, conditioned. He reached for the notebook again, flipping toward the middle. In one margin, Eleanor had scribbled a sketch, an eye with a diagonal slash through it, and the phrase, "Silent Nose Protocol." Caleb didn't know what it meant, but it made the CG09X tag feel heavier in his mind. That evening, as twilight fell over Rivershade, someone else was staring at a very different notebook. Sienna Maddox sat in a cramped apartment above the Fox and Fur Cafe on Main Street, her laptop glowing in the dark. A tall woman in her late 20s, Sienna had a lean frame, unruly auburn hair, and a perpetually furrowed brow that made people assume she was annoyed, even when she wasn't. She had the quick eyes of a truth seeker, and a voice that rarely rose in volume but always carried weight. Her work as an independent journalist had earned her praise and warnings in equal measure. 5 years ago, her brother, Rhett Maddox, a junior conservation officer, had gone missing during a wildlife tracking mission in the very woods outside Rivershade. The case was closed as an accident. She never believed it. Tonight, while researching an uptick in missing dogs across northern Vermont, she stumbled on an old public archive, a decommissioned rescue roster from 2015. One name stood out: Caleb Thorne. A note beside it read, "Retired, lost partner Maya during avalanche 2019. Civilian status confirmed." Sienna frowned. She had seen that name before. Eleanor Thorne, environmental investigator. There had been whispers in activist circles that she'd been digging into military misappropriations. Sienna enlarged a grainy image. Caleb, in uniform, standing beside a beautiful woman with dark eyes and sun-streaked hair tied back in a braid. Eleanor. In the corner of the photo, barely visible, was a dog with piercing amber eyes, gold-furred, almost glowing. Her phone buzzed. A contact had responded. "Old man still lives out near Wolf Pine Ridge. Doesn't talk to anyone. Keeps to himself. Got some weird golden dog that knows when a storm's coming." Sienna sat back. "You're the one I need, Mr. Thorne." The next morning, she packed a thermos of coffee, a pair of boots, and a notebook. She wasn't sure what she'd find, but every story had a beginning, and hers pointed straight to a man with a haunted past and a dog that still watched the snow like it remembered something it couldn't say. Back at the house, Caleb leaned down to refill Rune's bowl with warmed broth. The pup lapped at it slowly, his tail swishing once, then again. He looked up, eyes clear for the first time since Caleb had pulled him from the snow. Then, without prompting, he walked to the fireplace. He sniffed at the framed photo of Eleanor and licked the glass. Caleb froze. Solace had done the exact same thing, the night after Eleanor's body had been found. No one had trained him to. He'd just known. Caleb's throat tightened. He reached for the frame, but stopped short. On the back of the photo was a faint mark, barely visible, a stamped code, CG09X. He stepped back, a knot forming in his gut. Eleanor had known, and now, so did he. The wind screamed that night, sweeping across the ridgeline like a voice trying to warn of something that could not yet be seen. Caleb stood at the sink, rinsing out a chipped enamel mug, when the kitchen light flickered once, then again. Solace, lying near the back door, raised his head. Ears pricked, muscles tensing like bowstrings. Rune was asleep by the fire, breathing evenly, his small frame curled like a comma in the warmth. Caleb glanced toward the camera monitor tucked on a shelf by the pantry. The feed had gone black. All four corners, front yard, driveway, back fence, side entrance, gone. He dried his hands, heart sinking into the old familiar rhythm of alertness. This wasn't a power issue. It was something deliberate. Solus let out a low growl, more vibration than sound, and stood, staring through the frosted glass of the back door. Caleb moved quickly, grabbing the heavy-duty flashlight from the hook and sliding his service revolver into the waistband of his jeans. He crept across the kitchen, flicked off the interior lights, and cracked the door open just enough to shine the beam into the yard. A shadow moved. Not an animal. Too smooth. Too calculated. The flashlight's beam caught a glimpse of a figure. Average height, dressed in winter tactical gear with a dark cowl pulled over the face. The glint of a metallic object in their hand revealed more than just intent. It was a tranquilizer gun. Silenced. Military grade. Caleb didn't speak, didn't shout. He moved, fast, swinging the door wide as Solus bolted into the snow. The intruder spun and fired. The dart missed, striking a wooden beam with a dull thunk. Rune was awake and barking now, confused and scared. In the chaos, the pup sprinted toward the rear gate, and the figure lunged. There was a tangle of fur and snow, a yelp, and then silence. When Caleb rounded the shed with the flashlight, all he saw was Solus disappearing into the trees, chasing a set of footprints that led north toward the forest. Rune was gone. "Damn it!" Caleb cursed, snatching his winter coat from the hook and slamming the door behind him. He moved quickly, flashlight in one hand, the revolver in the other, following the trail that Solus had carved through the snow. It didn't take long for him to find the first sign. Blood. A small spatter, barely visible, but fresh. Then came the barking. Solus, deep, enraged, protective. Caleb broke into a jog, ignoring the sting of cold air in his lungs, the bite of frost at his ears. The trees closed in, tall and skeletal, branches like claws. The barking grew louder until he saw movement in a small clearing near a ravine. Rune was there, wrapped in a wool blanket on the ground, squirming in a daze. Solus had the attacker cornered against a tree. The man held the tranquilizer gun in one hand, the other raised in a defensive posture. He was young, maybe late 20s, with a narrow build, a narrow face, and eyes that flicked wildly between Solus and Caleb. "Step away from the dog," Caleb growled, leveling the revolver. I wasn't going to hurt him," the man stammered. "Just needed him back." "Back?" Caleb stepped closer. "So you're not alone." The man didn't answer. Solus barked, sharp and commanding. Caleb kicked the tranquilizer gun out of reach and knelt beside Rune. The pup whimpered, blinking slowly, his limbs limp with sedation, but breathing stable. The dart had grazed him. Enough to weaken, not enough to knock him fully unconscious. "You're going to explain everything," Caleb said, "starting with what's in your pack." The man hesitated. "I don't have time to be gentle." He relented. Inside the man's pack were several items: a small vial of liquid tranquilizer, a handheld chip scanner, a folded map with several points marked along the Vermont-New Hampshire border, and a list. Printed, slightly water-stained and coded: CG09X, CG07V, CG10M. Caleb's blood ran cold. Rune was CG09X, but the other two? "How many of them are there?" Caleb asked. The man swallowed. "At least 6, maybe more. They're scattered, some didn't make it." "Who's organizing this?" "I don't know names," the man whispered. "I just transport. My contact was a vet, a woman. Keeps things off books." Caleb's jaw tightened. "A vet?" The man nodded. By the time Caleb returned to the house, Solus walking proudly at his side, Rune bundled in his arms, the adrenaline had worn off, replaced by fatigue and rising fear. He didn't trust the local authorities. Too many oddities in recent years. But there was one person who might know more. In town, under a different light, another thread of the truth was unraveling. Sienna Maddox moved silently through the darkened veterinary clinic at the corner of Main and Alder. The building was a modest 2-story structure with snow-laden eaves and shuttered windows. Inside, it smelled faintly of antiseptic and pine. She held a mini flashlight between her teeth as she picked the lock to the back office. Dr. Elodie Moreau was the town's senior veterinarian, late 40s, French-born, always wore crisp white blouses and spoke with precision that masked deeper coldness. She had arrived in Rivershade 3 years ago, shortly after Eleanor Thorne's death. Her clinic had an impeccable reputation, but Sienna had heard things. Dogs transferred to other shelters that were never seen again, owners denied visitation rights, and recently, an unmarked truck seen parked behind the building after hours. Sienna found the filing cabinet, but it wasn't what caught her eye. It was the device on the desk, a slim metal box with a blinking green light. She scanned the attached tag. Property of Orion Lab Systems, chip conversion device V3, 1, her breath caught. A tool to alter chip data, convert military tracking information into civilian registry, legal erasure. She plugged in her USB and downloaded the files. Most were encrypted, but one folder labeled Exports opened easily. It contained documents listing dog shipments from various addresses across Vermont. Over 3 years, destinations included addresses in Nevada, Germany, and Turkey, all coded CG followed by alphanumerics. Sienna's hand trembled as she yanked the USB and ducked back into the night. Tomorrow, she'd confront Caleb. Tonight, she had proof. Back at his home, Caleb sat at the edge of his bed with the fire down to embers. Rune was sleeping again. Solace watched the door. On the table lay Eleanor's notebook. Caleb opened it again, searching pages he had long avoided. There, near the back, smudged, faint, but still legible, was a line he had forgotten. "If I don't come back, don't trust anyone touching the dogs." Caleb stared at the words, a whisper from a woman long gone, now echoing louder than ever. He looked at Rune, Solace, and the snow falling outside. Someone was coming. They already had. And now, the real hunt had begun. The snow had stopped falling, but the cold had sharpened in its stillness. A low fog hovered along the tree line beyond Caleb's property, veiling the pines in ghostly breath. Rune paced near the front door, ears twitching, occasionally glancing at Solace as if waiting for a signal. Solace, lying by the fireplace, had been still for nearly an hour, but his golden eyes were open, watching, calculating. Then he rose without a sound, walked to Caleb, and nudged his thigh once, deliberate, focused. Caleb, who had been sitting cross-legged on the floor with Eleanor's notebook in hand, looked down at the older retriever. "You've got something, don't you?" he murmured. Solace turned and walked to the door, tail stiff, glancing over his shoulder. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. 10 minutes later, the trio, Caleb, Rune tucked in a field harness at his side, and Solace leading, moved through the forest, guided only by moonlight and instinct. Behind them trailed Sienna Maddox, bundled in a heavy navy peacoat, scarf tight around her neck, camera slung over her shoulder. She had shown up at Caleb's door only hours earlier, holding the USB drive and the name of Dr. Elodie Moreau like a match about to ignite a long trail of gasoline. Now, she followed without question. There was something in the way Caleb moved through the woods, fluid, measured, never second-guessing a step. And Solace? He was uncanny. The golden retriever stopped every few yards, nose to the ground, then continued deeper into the forest, beyond the old snowmobile paths, into wild territory no local hiker ever dared cross after dark. After nearly an hour, Solace slowed, sniffed, and whined. They arrived at a cluster of pine trees bent unnaturally inward, forming a loose ring around what looked like a rusted metal hatch half buried in snow. Caleb pulled away the frozen branches and revealed the handle, heavy-duty, military-grade, with a keypad long since corroded. With effort, he pried it open, and a foul mix of rust, fuel, and something darker, sweeter, blood, rose into the night. They descended into a narrow corridor lined with concrete. Sienna flipped on her flashlight. The walls were scarred with old claw marks. The air was thick with decay. At the end of the hall was a room lit only by the glow of her beam, a makeshift holding facility, no larger than a shipping container. Dog crates lined the walls, some broken, some locked. One held nothing but a torn harness and a burned collar. Another was soaked in old blood. Caleb moved toward a crate with an old stencil barely visible on the metal panel. Geoscan Unit, CGS. -10. His breath caught. A small tattooed symbol, a stylized compass rose, was scorched onto the inside of the gate, the same symbol Eleanor had once doodled in her notebook's margins, the same she'd once traced across his forearm with her finger on a quiet night as she whispered, "This is where it all leads." Rune growled low. He was staring at a small shelf in the corner where old hard drives were stacked, dusty, battered, forgotten. Caleb grabbed one, pocketed it. Another was marked with tape. Training 09X and M03. Caleb's heart slammed against his ribs. "Maya," he breathed. He plugged the drive into Sienna's laptop then and there, perching it atop an overturned crate. The grainy video flickered to life. In the frame, a metal training enclosure, 2 German shepherds, 1 adult, 1 puppy, on opposite ends. The larger dog barked once, then crawled forward on command, pressing her paw to a button embedded in the wall. The pup mirrored her. "Maya," Caleb whispered again. Her body was leaner, scar across her flank still fresh, but it was unmistakably her. She guided the pup, Rune, through obstacle drills, scent detection, and eventually a simulation involving static explosives and red light pulses. She was teaching him to recognize threats, Caleb said, voice hushed. They weren't training war dogs. They were making sensors. "That's what Eleanor was trying to expose," Sienna replied, her voice brittle with awe. The video ended. But before they could speak again, Solace barked once, short, sharp, warning. Footsteps crunched the snow above. Caleb motioned for silence. He crept up the ladder, pistol drawn. As he reached the top, he found a flashlight already pointed in his face. "Easy, Thorn," came a graveled voice. "You move like I taught you." The light lowered to reveal Officer Beckett, Rivershade's longest-serving patrolman. Mid-60s, grizzled, with a limp from an old rotator cuff injury and a face that rarely smiled. He was tall, barrel-chested, wore a worn sheriff's jacket and a tan beanie pulled low. His breath steamed in the cold. "What are you doing out here?" Caleb asked, stepping out of the hatch. Beckett didn't answer at first. Instead, he handed Caleb a folded piece of paper. On it, in block letters, was a single line. "Don't let it end like Eleanor." Then he looked past Caleb, into the woods. "You think the town's blind," he said. "It's not. I've kept quiet because I didn't have proof. But now, maybe you do." He turned and walked away. Back at Caleb's house later that night, after Sienna had gone to her rented cabin to review the files and Solace and Rune were asleep, Caleb called in a favor. Harris answered on the third ring. "You still up for late-night trouble?" Caleb asked. "Always, especially if it involves you." Harris Langley was a retired K-9 officer who had served with Caleb during their early years in military canine search and rescue. African-American, late 50s, bald with a silver goatee, Harris had a dry sense of humor and a memory that never lost details. He lived in a converted firehouse 2 towns over, now stuffed with old gear, computers, and one very spoiled bulldog named Winston. When Caleb arrived, Harris raised an eyebrow at the drive he handed over. "You're not supposed to have this." "I'm not supposed to have a dog who was trained in classified mineral detection either," Caleb replied. Harris worked fast. As the files loaded, he leaned back, arms crossed. This program, K9 Geoscan, started on a joint contract between civilian environmental research and military-industrial complexes. Goal was to use K9 olfactory systems to detect rare minerals, like lithium, cobalt, without invasive drilling. Caleb stared at the screen. "Eleanor filed something, didn't she?" Harris nodded. 3 weeks before her death, she submitted an internal report questioning the ethics of canine conditioning methods. She named 3 contractors. 2 of them went off-grid after her death. The third, Moreau Veterinary Consulting, got a federal grant. Caleb's pulse quickened. "You think she was silenced?" "I think," Harris said, "you're walking straight into what she died trying to expose." Suddenly the dog stirred. Winston barked from the Bay Area. Solace stood up. Rune growled, a low sound that hadn't come from training but from instinct. Outside, they heard it. Footsteps crunching snow. Someone was approaching the firehouse. And they weren't alone. The fog that descended over Rivershade Forest that night was unlike anything Caleb had seen in years. Thick as wool and cold as guilt, it curled around the trunks of pines and masked even the sharpest flashlight beams. The moon was a faded smear above the canopy. Every step the group took crunched underfoot, yet felt dangerously loud in the dense silence. They had been on the run for nearly 20 minutes, barely keeping ahead of the trackers. 5 men in forest camouflaged tactical gear, armed and accompanied by 2 scent hounds, lean and fierce, likely Belgian Malinois, bred for combat precision. Solace had picked up their scent before anyone else, growling low and herding Caleb and Sienna off the path into the thicker brush. Rune followed close, his smaller paws making barely a sound, ears perked at every broken twig behind them. "They're gaining," Sienna whispered, clutching the side strap of her pack. Her breath fogged the air. Caleb didn't respond. His face was drawn, jaw locked. He knew this kind of pursuit, the way it tightened over you, step by step, like a noose. His eyes scanned for landmarks, but the fog made everything unfamiliar. A sudden snap of metal and hiss of air. Solace yelped and stumbled forward, legs buckling. "No!" Caleb dropped to his knees, catching the dog just before he collapsed. A small tranquilizer dart stuck out of the retriever's side, trembling with each shallow breath. "They've got gas-powered silencers," Caleb muttered, pulling the dart free and flinging it into the brush. Solace whimpered once, then fell still, breathing shallowly. "Leave him, Caleb," Sienna said, her voice pained. "You can't carry—" "No." Caleb scooped the 80-pound dog into his arms with a grunt. "You go ahead if you have to. I don't leave family." Rune barked, sharp and defiant, as if echoing the vow. They ran. Somehow they reached the base of the western ridge where Harris Langley's house sat, an old firehouse refurbished into a cluttered sanctuary of memories, gear, and dog beds. Rune scratched at the back entrance, alerting Winston, the stubby bulldog guardian inside, who barked once, then waddled toward the door. Harris opened it, a shotgun in one hand and a look of disbelief on his face. "You look like hell." "No time," Caleb gasped, pushing past him. "We've got company." Inside, Harris moved with the old efficiency of a soldier who never forgot his reflexes. He was still broad-shouldered, with a grizzled beard and the kind of presence that made people fall in line without question. He had once trained some of the most elite K-9 units in the country, but after the death of his partner dog, he had retired into quiet solitude, until now. Sienna helped Caleb lay Solace on a cot in the old firehouse bay. The older dog was barely conscious, lips twitching, teeth occasionally baring at shadows. Harris worked quickly, administering a sedative blocker and a saline IV, then bandaging the injection site. "Rifle-caliber dart." "That's military issue. These aren't poachers," Harris said, shaking his head. "They're contractors." "They're after Rune," Caleb said, "and whatever Eleanor found." Harris looked at the pup, who now lay by Solace's side, guarding him. "This one's got heart. And memory," Caleb added. He knew when they were coming, and he knew which hallway to take at the bunker. Harris handed Caleb a folded waterproof map. "These are old recon shelters, built during the Cold War. Some were repurposed during the K-9 geoscan trials. Most people don't know they exist. But you'll need a place to go soon. They'll torch this place if they know you're here." He wasn't wrong. Just then, Caleb's phone buzzed, a text from Beckett. "Town council to vote next week. Quinn pushing for tourism expansion. Needs forest cleared. You're running out of time. B." Below it, another message. "They got Eleanor's file from the records vault, and they're coming. Beckett." Once a by-the-book cop, he had changed after Eleanor saved his life during a winter raid years ago. Now, perhaps guilt or truth was pulling him toward redemption. Meanwhile, Sienna stepped out to the back lot, dialing her editor. "I've got the footage," she said. "Hard drive, documents, video of the dogs, everything. We need to run the story now." But the response on the other end was hesitant. "Legal complications. The mayor's office has raised concerns," he said. "Maybe hold the peace for a week, until we can verify." "They bought you," Sienna said coldly. "You cowards." She hung up. Her hands shook with fury. Then, turning back toward the house, she saw the satellite uplink device near the shed, one of Caleb's old field transmitters. 5 minutes later, she was live. "This is Sienna Maddox reporting from Rivershade, Vermont," she began, voice low but unshaken. "What you're about to see may change how we look at animal testing, environmental corruption, and the real cost of corporate greed." She uploaded video of the bunker, of the training footage, of Solace growling over Caleb. of Rune nosing into Eleanor's journal like he understood what she once knew. In the quiet, the firehouse hummed with tension. Then came the smell, acrid, sharp. Smoke. Rune barked wildly, scratching at the far hallway. Harris jumped up. "They're burning it! Back exit! Go!" The back wing of the house had been doused with fuel. Flames licked the windowsills. Caleb hoisted Solace once more, this time staggering from exhaustion, but determined. Rune led the way, weaving through storage rooms and into the garage bay. There, Harris yanked open a false panel in the wall and led them into a secondary stairwell. Outside, as the roof began to collapse, they escaped into the tree line. But someone had been waiting. A figure, masked, cloaked, holding a cattle prod, stepped from the shadows. His stance was military, precise. He moved toward Caleb, weapon raised. Solace, half-conscious, stirred, growled, then lunged. The man screamed as Solace latched onto his arm, dragging him sideways. Caleb dropped the dog, trying to pull him off, but Solace wouldn't let go until the man fled. In the chaos, Sienna filmed it all. Blood, smoke, growls, and all. They ran again. 20 minutes later, hidden in a cave marked on Harris's map, Sienna looked at her camera screen. The final frame, Solace, body trembling, eyes defiant, standing between Caleb and the shadow of death. "This is it," she whispered. "This is the story." The attic smelled of cedar and thyme. Dust hung in the air like a whisper no one had spoken in years. Caleb hadn't been up here since Eleanor's funeral, and the act of pulling down the creaking ladder felt like disturbing a ghost's slumber. The old farmhouse groaned beneath the wind as he climbed, each step drawing him deeper into a world that no longer belonged to the living. The gabled space was cramped, filled with boxes marked SAR Team and Winter Gear, along with Eleanor's collection of antique maps and expedition journals. But it was the faded painting above the rafters, an oil rendering of a German shepherd in snow, almost abstract in brushstroke, that caught his attention. She had hung it here herself. "It doesn't belong downstairs," she'd said once. "It knows too much." There, behind the canvas, hidden in the frame's backing, he found it. A thin leather-bound notebook, worn at the edges, bound with a fraying cord. Inside, her handwriting greeted him like a pulse revived. Elegant, exact, each letter a shard of who she had been. The margins bore the same compass rose sketch he'd seen in the bunker crate. Caleb sat cross-legged in the slant of pale attic light, opened the journal, and began to read. At first, the entries were clinical, logistics, schedules, coordinates, but then came the shift. Mentions of Geoscan Series CG codes began to populate the pages, each tied to a different animal. The codes matched the ones they had seen on the list in the intruder's pack. CG09X, CG07V, CG10M, then underlined, dated precisely 1 week before her death. They're not just trafficking dogs. They're turning them into walking sensors, trained to detect subterranean mineral signatures. No permits, no oversight. If this goes public, it will bury them. Rune is evidence, a living witness. Caleb closed his eyes. The pieces locked together now. Eleanor hadn't just stumbled into something dangerous. She had documented it meticulously, and she had known they were watching her. Downstairs, the sound of claws on wood signaled movement. Solace had woken. He found them in the old firehouse office. Sienna curled in an armchair, her laptop resting on her knees. Rune curled protectively by Solace's side. The older retriever was awake, but still sluggish, his breathing deeper, steadier. Rune, barely 4 months old, had draped himself over Solace's front legs like a child finding home. Caleb dropped to his knees and ran a trembling hand over Solace's fur, then looked at Rune. "You too?" he whispered, voice cracking. "You're not just dogs. You're the legacy of something I never understood, and maybe still don't." Sienna looked up, her eyes rimmed with fatigue and something more tender. Caleb held up the notebook. She knew. Eleanor. Everything. He opened to the back, where the final entries had been scribbled hastily, the lines shakier than the earlier ones. Victor Rinaldi ordered the mother terminated, claimed the pups are enough for $1 million return. He doesn't need loyalty. He needs obedience. Sienna froze. Victor Rinaldi. I've seen that name in international trafficking reports, but he's always off the radar, Offshore holdings, encrypted accounts, proxy shell companies. Caleb handed her the notebook. Find him. She flipped through it, then paused. A loose sheet was tucked inside, an excerpt from an email Eleanor had printed. The metadata still attached to the header showed it came from an anonymous source within a shell corporation in Zurich. No need to keep the mother alive. The offspring will yield the necessary return, project acquisition on schedule, local official compliant, proceed with Phase 2, VR. Sienna stared. Vermont border, local official. It's Quinn, isn't it? Caleb nodded grimly. Mayor Quinn. The one pushing for forest redevelopment. He's been bought. As if to confirm it, Caleb's phone buzzed again. Another encrypted message from Beckett. This one included a document, an internal report Eleanor had filed with the Office of Wildlife Research and Regulation 3 weeks before her death. Its classification? Unverified, not actionable, source potentially compromised. I gave this to my superior, Beckett's note said. He filed it under noise. Later, he was offered a consulting position with a private security firm tied to Quinn. Caleb stood, rage coiling inside him like a slow boil. They buried her truth and used the cover of bureaucracy to erase her. He looked over at Solace again, who now had his head resting gently over Rune's smaller form. Despite the gray around his muzzle and the tremble in his limbs, the old dog's eyes remained fiercely aware, watching Caleb like he always had, like Eleanor once had. Caleb's voice broke. If Rune survived, maybe we still have hope. Sienna moved beside him, setting the laptop down. Then, we give people that hope. She opened a folder on the device, stitched together from the drives, the footage, the files recovered from Moreau's clinic, and now Eleanor's journal. Everything. A full expose. But it wasn't just proof. It was a reckoning. Still, it wasn't enough to win. Not yet. Sienna traced her finger across one page of the notebook, an old geological map Eleanor had marked with ink. Look here. At the edge of the map, near the Vermont-Canadian border, a red circle surrounded a location labeled simply WRA Wildlife Recovery Annex. It had once been a legitimate animal rehabilitation center, but 3 years ago, funding had dried up, and it had been repurposed as a private research facility by Quinn's office. Satellite images now showed new construction, underground extensions, energy signatures, multiple structures beyond public access. Sienna read aloud Eleanor's last handwritten line, buried between pages like a secret meant only for Caleb. If Rune is alive, then they failed to kill all the light. That means we still have a chance, but someone has to make them see it. As the sun began to rise behind the trees, casting long streaks of orange through the smoke-stained windows of the firehouse, Caleb made a decision. We go there, he said. Sienna looked up. To the annex? Caleb nodded. That's where Victor's base is. That's where this ends. The air around the Wildlife Recovery Annex was unnaturally still, as if the forest itself held its breath. Snow clung to the trees in brittle layers, and the sky hung low with the weight of another coming storm. Caleb crouched in the pine undergrowth, eyes fixed on the tall steel and stone structure that loomed ahead. It was far too fortified to be a sanctuary. The fence crowned with motion sensors, the narrow windows too high for viewing animals. They betrayed a purpose far removed from conservation. Beside him, Sienna adjusted the tiny body camera mounted to her coat, her breath visible in short bursts. Her expression was tense, but determined. Behind them, Harris held his old service pistol, jaw clenched. His years had slowed his stride, but not his instincts. And Solace, ever the sentinel, stayed low with ears pricked, flanked by Rune, whose young frame trembled, not from fear, but anticipation. He was old enough now to understand loss, old enough to seek it out. The group moved under the cover of darkness, skirting the south side where shadows pooled thickest. Caleb bypassed the fence alarm using a technique he learned in his military days, reversing the charge with a pulse jammer from Harris's gear. One by one, they slipped into the facility through an old maintenance hatch hidden beneath a false generator. Inside, the temperature dropped sharply. The air smelled sterile and sour, like metal, ammonia, and something decayed. They passed through a corridor where fluorescent lights flickered weakly. The walls were lined with institutional green paint, cracked in places. This wasn't a place of healing. It was a graveyard wearing a mask. The first room they entered was a surgical chamber. Tables with restraints, cabinets of anesthetics, and tags, each labeled with government inventory codes, and on the wall, faded prints of canines, some crossed out with red marker. "Look," Harris whispered. "Empty kennels. Dozens." Down the next hall they found them. A chamber lined with cages, most now open and empty, though scratch marks and torn fur still clung to the bars. At the end of the room, in a cage that had not been opened in days, lay a body. The dog was still unnaturally thin, black and tan coat dulled by neglect. But even in death, her build was noble. Shoulders square, head lifted as if waiting for someone to return. Rune padded forward, slowly, tentatively. Then, with sudden recognition, he broke into a sprint and flung his body against the cage bars, whining, pawing, trying to wake her. "Maya," Caleb breathed. Sienna stared. "That's the dog from Eleanor's training video, isn't it?" "Yes," he whispered, stepping closer. "That's his mother." They broke the lock, and Rune crawled inside, licking Maya's muzzle, nuzzling under her chin, tail wagging like she might respond. But she didn't. Solace entered next, moving with reverence. He raised his nose and let out a single, bone-deep howl. The sound echoed through the concrete halls, long and low and grieving. The kind of sound that made bones remember. Caleb sank to his knees. "She waited," he murmured, reaching a hand into the cage. "She kept herself alive, waiting for him." Tears ran freely now. Sienna, trying to hold the camera steady, caught every moment, the pup's efforts to wake the mother who would never move again. Solace pressing his head against hers. Caleb whispering her name over and over. Then, behind them, the world erupted. Shouts in the hall, boots on tile. A voice barked commands. A tranquilizer dart embedded itself in the metal wall above Caleb's head. "Move!" Harris shouted, drawing his weapon. "We're compromised!" Sienna slammed her hand to her transmitter, activating her live stream feed. "This is Sienna Maddox," she said through clenched teeth. "We are inside the Wildlife Recovery Annex in Rivershade. What you're seeing is real. They are killing military dogs, experimenting, abandoning, erasing, and now they're coming for us." More shouts. Another dart fired. Caleb grabbed Rune, who resisted, trying to stay beside Maya. "She's gone, boy," he whispered hoarsely. "She kept you alive. Now we have to do the same." They fled through the eastern corridor. Gunfire, no longer tranquilizers, rattled behind them. Then the first howl cut through the woods, followed by another, and another. Outside the perimeter fence, in the white mist that rolled in with the snow, shapes began to emerge. Gray, brown, black. Lean bodies, eyes bright, breath fogging in unison. Wolves. Caleb stopped dead. "I know them." Harris turned, eyes wide. "Those are your rescues?" Caleb nodded. "I raised them when I was still practicing. Released them years ago." Solace limped forward. Somehow his presence was enough. The lead wolf, a pale-furred alpha with a half-missing ear, nuzzled him once, then turned and ran. The others followed. And Solace, without hesitation, led the charge. The wolves burst into the clearing like shadows made flesh, colliding with the guards stationed around the facility. Chaos unfolded. Men shouting, wolves snarling, gunfire cracking through the trees. "Go now!" Harris bellowed. They ran through the breach the wolves created, Sienna filming all of it, broadcasting to an audience that, within minutes, numbered over 30,000. Hashtags began to trend. #SaveRune, #Justice for Maya, #Shutdown Rivershade. They reached the trailhead by the old ranger's outpost. The forest opened to the ridge path, snow trampled by the movement of man and beast. Then came the sound, low and rising. Not a howl, not a gunshot, but an engine. Lights cut through the trees. A black SUV screeched to a halt. Then another. Then came the voice. Calm, clear, authoritative. "This is Agent Quinn of the Federal Bureau. Stand down." Caleb froze. "Quinn?" Sienna whispered. "The mayor?" "No," Caleb corrected. "Her niece. I remember the name now. She's Bureau." A woman stepped into view, tall, broad-shouldered, with salt and pepper hair tied in a braid beneath her jacket hood. She carried herself with the weight of someone who had waited for justice a long time. She held a radio in one hand. "We've seen the live stream. We're here now, and we won't let Eleanor or Maya have died in vain." Behind her, more vehicles appeared. Agents with medical gear and field packs moved in formation. One of them knelt beside Solace, already checking his vitals. Rune stayed close to Maya's blanket, which Caleb had brought with them, his young face turned upward toward the new arrivals. Quiet. Waiting. "Let's finish this," Caleb said, rising with tears still on his face but fire in his voice. Agent Quinn nodded. "Let's." Morning broke over Rivershade like a hush before the hymn, pale gold light glinting off snow-laced rooftops and frost-covered pine needles. The town square, once known for its sleepy charm and silent winters, now buzzed with voices from every corner of the country. Black SUVs lined the roads, satellite dishes rotated skyward, and camera crews wrapped in parkas and scarves adjusted their lenses, eyes trained on the podium erected outside the old town hall. Caleb Thorne stood just beyond the crowd, hands tucked deep into the pockets of his wool coat. Beside him sat Solace, his golden coat brushed and dignified, the gray around his muzzle a quiet testament to all he had endured. Rune stood alert beside him, now wearing a sleek harness bearing the insignia of the newly ratified National Canine Protection and Recovery Unit. He had grown stronger in the weeks following the rescue, his posture more confident, his eyes older than his age. The aftermath of the raid on the Wildlife Recovery Annex had swept across the nation like wildfire. Video footage from Sienna's live stream had garnered over 12 million views within 72 hours. Hashtags like #JusticeForMaya, #BlackRidgeTruth, and #OneDogOneLight trended globally. Activists flooded the inboxes of federal agencies, and within days, the Department of the Interior had deployed full investigation teams to Vermont. Victor Rinaldi had been the first to fall. Captured attempting to flee through a private airfield near the border, he was found with falsified passports, encrypted hard drives, and a ledger detailing payouts to local officials and foreign buyers. Dr. Moreau had been taken from his clinic, still in his lab coat, attempting to delete medical records, and Mayor Quinn, thin-lipped, polished, and smug, had been escorted out of town hall in handcuffs, still insisting it was all a misunderstanding. Not a single document had been destroyed. Thanks to Solace's warning howl and Rune's instincts, everything had been preserved. Now, just 3 weeks later, Rivershade was at the center of something new, something sacred. Agent Miriam Quinn, tall and deliberate in her movements, approached the microphone. She wore a black peacoat over her bureau uniform, her silver braid resting over one shoulder. Her voice, when it came, was steady. "Today we stand on the ashes of a terrible truth, but from it we rise with purpose. Thanks to the courage of citizens, investigators, and one remarkable dog named Maya, whose sacrifice will not be forgotten, we are proud to announce the permanent designation of Black Ridge Reserve as a National Wildlife Heritage Sanctuary." Applause rippled through the square. Caleb felt a hand brush his. Sienna. She wore a scarf embroidered with the same compass rose that had once adorned Eleanor's notebook. She smiled briefly, then stepped back. She no longer worked for any major network. She had declined all offers. Instead, she had converted the old radio station into a non-profit media center focused on conservation education and investigative training. It was now called the Light Station. Agent Quinn continued, "This land will not only be protected, it will teach. The federal government has approved funding for the Maya Solis Center for Canine Recovery and Forest Protection, located on the ridge where this story began." Another wave of applause. Caleb glanced down at Solace, who simply blinked up at him with gentle, clouded eyes. "And now," Quinn said, "we invite the man whose courage, resilience, and integrity brought this all to light. Caleb Thorne." Caleb hesitated, not out of fear, but because for so long he had forgotten how to speak to crowds. Eleanor had always been the one with the words, but as he walked to the podium, Solace and Rune at his side, something loosened in his chest. The crowd quieted. Caleb looked out across the faces. Reporters, federal agents, animal rights activists, students, volunteers, locals, and somewhere, in the back, Harris stood beside Sheriff Beckett, who now wore civilian clothes, his badge officially passed to the man he had once trained. He cleared his throat. "I wasn't supposed to be here," he said softly. 3 years ago, I buried a life I thought was my only one, and a woman who believed animals could save people just as much as people save animals. Her name was Eleanor. She was my wife. The wind picked up slightly. Cameras clicked. Somewhere, a child's golden retriever barked in the crowd. She uncovered a secret, a program that treated living beings as tools, not souls, and for trying to stop it, she was silenced. But her work lived on. In Maya, in Rune, and in Solace, who never gave up on me. He looked down at the two dogs. One raised me out of grief, the other reminded me how to fight again. A hush fell. Even the wind seemed to pause. We name parks after presidents. We build statues for soldiers. But today, I stand here for a dog who refused to let the last spark die. Her name was Maya, and this is her legacy. He stepped back, his throat tight. Solace wagged his tail once. Rune looked ahead with calm focus. The ceremony ended with a standing ovation. Later that afternoon, under a wide expanse of sky where clouds drifted like slow thoughts, Caleb stood at the top of the snowy bluff where Eleanor had once taken soil samples. A new marker stood beside her grave, a stone etched with the likenesses of Maya and Eleanor, their silhouettes side by side. He held a letter in his hand, the last one she'd written, found folded between pages of her hidden journal. It was stained, its ink faded in places, but her handwriting remained as delicate as snowflakes. If they ever find Rune, Caleb, don't let them break him. He's more than a tool. He's proof of everything I've tried to say, of everything I still believe. Solace will guide you. He always knew how to find the light in any storm, and you're braver than you think. I'll be with you, always, in every howl, in every footstep. Caleb folded the letter and placed it in the pocket closest to his heart. Rune lay beside Solace at the edge of the hill, both dogs watching the valley below, where workers had already begun laying foundations for the center. The wind stirred the trees, sending flurries of snow dancing like ash or angel feathers. Behind him, Sienna approached with Harris and Beckett. "You sure you don't want to give this one more headline?" Caleb asked her. She smiled. "Some stories, they don't belong to the world. They belong to the ones who lived them." They stood in silence for a while. Then, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting gold and crimson light across the white ridge, Caleb whispered, "There are roads that vanish, but they leave footprints of courage, and there are souls, even in four-legged forms, who lead us back to the light." And together they stood watching as day gave way to stars, and the silence of winter wrapped the land like a promise kept. In a world that often feels dark, loud, and lost, we sometimes forget that God's miracles don't always arrive in thunderclaps or parted skies. Sometimes they come quietly, in the shape of a loyal dog lying beside a grave, in the cry of a frightened pup longing to be held, in the silent strength of someone who chooses to fight for good, even when no one's watching. This story of Caleb, Rune, Solace, and the spirit of Eleanor is more than a tale of rescue. It's a reminder that love never truly dies, that loyalty transcends time, and that God works through the humble, the broken, and the brave. God sent Maya to protect the truth when no one else would. He placed Rune in Caleb's path to reignite a flame long extinguished. He let Solace guide them all through the storm, never asking for anything in return. Maybe today you're waiting for a sign. Maybe you feel forgotten, tired, alone. But hear this. God hasn't left you. He's still writing your story. Maybe he's sending your own Rune or Solace your way right now. Maybe this story itself is the nudge you've been needing. To trust again, to hope again, to believe again. If this story moved you, let it move others too. Drop a comment below, share a memory of a beloved pet, or tell us how God has shown up in your life in quiet, unexpected ways. Share this video with a friend who might be going through a hard time. You never know what light it could spark. Subscribe to this channel for more true stories that blend love, faith, animals, and the hidden miracles in everyday life. And finally, before you go, let's say a prayer together. Dear God, thank you for the quiet messengers you send into our lives, for every dog that brings us comfort, for every soul that walks beside us through the storm. Bless every person reading these words. Bring peace to their hearts, healing to their wounds, and courage to their steps. May they never forget. They are seen, they are loved, and they are never walking alone. Amen? See you in the next story, friend, and until then, may God bless you and keep you.